What I want to do in this video is have a look at the Christian theology around the problem of evil. Now, this is one of the a very important part of the existence of God when we're discussing the philosophy of religion and the philosophy of whether or not God exists, because the problem of evil does to some present an argument against the existence of God. The traditional argument being, if God exists and if God is all good and all loving, omnibenevolent, then how can God also allow evil to exist in the world? Because if he was all powerful and could do anything, he was all knowing, he knew everything that was happening, and he was all loving and omnibenevolent, then surely he would not allow evil and suffering to exist. And there's been thousands and thousands of years of Christian theology developing principles to try and explain how evil and suffering can exist whilst also God existing as well. And we're going to look at two main theories in this video. We're going to talk about the teachings of St Augustine and the teachings of Saint Iranaeus. And then we're also going to look at some other Christian views and specifically focus on the book of Job as well. So let's start by looking at the teachings of St Augustine. We're not going to go into a lot of detail about these teachings because, well, quite frankly, this is a GCSE lesson, so we don't need to. But if you went up to A level, then you would be studying this in a lot more detail. And obviously, if you went to an undergraduate level, then you'd be studying it in even more detail, especially things like the work of Augustine. So Augustine and Irenaeus were both Christian monks. Okay, and they lived in the early years of Christianity. Okay, the first few hundred years, in fact, of Christian theory. If I can actually do underline it, there we go. Now, Augustine theorized a number of principles that we would suggest are, canon within Christianity. Ideas around like grace and the problem and the idea of original sin. Okay. And the idea of original sin specifically links quite closely to the idea of evil and the problem of evil as well. And he's probably most famous and most influential for working out and theorizing principles and what are known as theodicies surrounding the problem of evil. Now, a theodicy is simply a method of trying to explain how an all-loving God can exist in the same world as evil and suffering. So the word is theodicy. Theodicy. Okay? And these are the theodicies of Augustine and Irenaeus. And arguably the two most famous theodicies, at least the earliest theodicies that were the most influential. So St Augustine's theodicy argues that evil is the responsibility of human beings. Okay, he says that we made the wrong choices. Humans make the wrong choices, and therefore this is why evil exists. This is why evil exists. So his theory links a little bit to the idea of free will. So humans are given free will to do what they want, so therefore evil exists because we make wrong choices. And he bases this view on the idea of Adam and Eve and their disobedience in the Garden of Eden. Don't forget that they ate the forbidden fruit. Okay, they ate the forbidden fruit. They were tempted by the devil, so they ate the forbidden fruit, which for some reason people, especially in Western culture, seem to think was an apple in Western art, but there's actually no there's no definitive evidence to suggest that it was any specific specific piece of fruit, but people just seem to think it was an apple. But yeah, they ate the fruit from the tree of knowledge, the forbidden fruit, and it was this choice that they made freely themselves, okay, to eat this fruit that led to the idea of original sin, because Adam and Eve were the first humans. They were the people that this was the original sin, and therefore from that every single child born from humanity, from Adam and Eve, because that's where given rise to the rest of humanity, they all born with original sin, and it's up for baptism to remove people from original sin. And this is why evil exists and why suffering exists. It's a choice that humans make. However, this does beg the question, if this is the case, then why did God create Adam and Eve at all? Okay, if he knew that they were going to be disobedient. And he should know. Some might argue, well, he didn't know that, but if he didn't know that, then he wouldn't be omniscient. Okay, so omniscient meaning all-knowing. We looked at that when we looked at the nature of God. So if God created Adam and Eve knowingly expecting them to sin, then why did they create them in the first place? There are a number of answers to this question, but this is a question that is raised when we're talking about the teachings of St Augustine. When we look at the teachings of Saint Iranaeus, he seems to come up with a little bit more of a way to justify why there is evil in the world. Augustine seems, in this account of Augustine's Theodicy, he seems to just explain that evil exists because humans make the wrong choices and effectively blames humanity, which to me isn't as satisfying as the arguments presented by Saint Iranaeus, because Iranaeus is responsible for being able to explain and justify why evil exists and why God allows evil to exist, because that's the question that is needed to be asked, because we have what is known as the inconsistent triad. Okay, and now this is the idea that if God is omnipotent, okay, he's all powerful, okay, he can do anything, and he is also omnibenevolent, okay, he's all loving, and then so we've got these two here, we can accept that God can do anything and is all loving, but at the same time evil exists, evil and suffering exists. Okay, now it's known as the inconsistent triad because it seems to be the case that these three characteristics, these three properties can't all exist at the same time, because if evil exists, then surely if he can do anything and is omnipotent and is all loving, then he wouldn't want evil for evil to exist, and so evil shouldn't exist. He wouldn't allow evil to exist. Okay, or you could argue evil does exist, okay, and God is omnibenevolent, but he's just not all powerful. He's not omnipotent, so therefore he cannot. So this is the idea of the inconsistent triad, and it's the job of Irenaeus to explain why God is all powerful, is all knowing. Okay, we can also write up here omniscient. So all loving, and we can write here is all knowing as well. Okay, slot that in somewhere. It's up to Irenaeus to explain how he is both these characteristics, and he knows everything, but he also therefore also allows evil to exist. Okay, and that's what a theodicy is. So this is what Irenaeus suggested. So Irenaeus was also a Christian monk who worked around theorizing the theology around the problem of evil. Like I've said before, theodicy. A theodicy. He argued that man was not created perfect, but it was actually created immature. And this implies that what happens is man grows and develops to perfection. And this is a plan by God. So man can make mistakes. So man makes mistakes. So man makes mistakes. Yeah. Okay. And this is what he believed. And so this gets rid of, if you notice, this actually eliminates any kind of question that was posed to Augustine's view, which is, if God knows that Adam and Eve were going to be disobedient, then why did he create Adam and Eve? Well, he created Adam and Eve, but not perfect, but more immature, okay? And he knew that man was going to grow and develop into perfection. And that is what causes people to make mistakes and to make wrong choices, and that's where evil arises. There are some people that would suggest that even this isn't as convincing as other ideas, other theories that we can look at. So there are a couple of other Christian views around the problem of evil. Obviously, there has been dedicated thousands of years to theology around the problem of evil. If you want me to go into more detail and really explain more, around the problem of evil. I'll do a specific video on other theories, more unorthodox theories around the problem of evil. But for now, these are just important ones that you should know for your exam. So some Christians believe that evil is necessary in order for us to understand goodness. Okay, so they suggest that you cannot know good. You can't know what good is without having any kind of understanding of the bad. Now, this is an interesting interpretation. It's suggesting that if it wasn't for things to be evil and for suffering to exist, then we wouldn't actually know what was good. Because if everything was good, then there would be nothing to, there would be no contrast. So, from this perspective, the existence of evil teaches us lessons. And this kind of can tie into Irenaeus' view. So it can tie into Iranaeus' theodicy, because he argues again that man is created imperfect and learns and develops into perfection and therefore makes mistakes, and so therefore the existence of evil teaches us lessons. Okay. Other Christians argue and go into the idea that evil and suffering, the fact that evil and suffering exists, is to test faith. It's a test of faith. To go through suffering is to test your faith in God, which is another interesting way of framing it. And this is what brings us to the book of Job, because there is actually some biblical evidence to suggest that evil does exist because of it being a test, it testing our faith. So in the book of Job, God actually allows the devil to bring evil and suffering onto Job, and this was a test to see whether or not he would remain faithful to God. So this was a test. Okay. And obviously this evidently shows, this is a good strong biblical evidence that evil does exist to test us. So it goes into it doesn't it goes to supporting this theory here that God uses evil and suffering to test people's faith. And obviously in the end Job did remain faithful despite the suffering, and thus God rewarded him. So these are a number of different theories that we can really look at when it comes to the problem of evil. In the next lessons, we're going to start looking at the traditional arguments for the existence of God, the ontological argument, the cosmological argument, the design argument, the moral argument, okay, and the teleological argument, of course. And we're going to start to look at how we can prove the existence of God logically and empirically, before we move on to how God is revealed, the revelation of God through the Bible and through humanity, and then start looking at the idea of religious experience.